That one project represents the export of 40,000 jobs that could have been created in Canada. So that's not sustainability.
That's the NDP leader, Tom Mulcair. He went to Washington. He's there now, and he's raising red flags about the Keystone XL pipeline, and he's slamming Canada's environmental record. His visit with American decision makers comes in the midst of a stampede of Conservative cabinet ministers who are traveling south of the border. They're trying to greenlight the highly controversial pipeline. Will the mixed messages have any impact on the Keystone pipeline fate? Should Canadian politicians take a hard stand or a united front when stepping out on the international stage? And some are wondering why Tom Mulcair didn't take a tougher stand if he really does believe that 40,000 jobs are at stake. Let's get the reaction from the government. The Natural Resources Minister, Joe Oliver, is with me now, and good to see you, Minister.
Happy to be here.
Your reaction to Tom Mulcair, his trip down to Washington, and he said there, although he didn't talk a lot about Keystone, he said this pipeline will cost Canadians 40,000 jobs.
Well, first of all, it's not going to cost jobs. It's going to create jobs in the tens of thousands. So he's simply wrong. The fact that there will be some jobs in the United States doesn't mean there are not going to be jobs in Canada. And of course there will be. And there's going to be a lot of economic benefits coming from the export of our oil to the United States to get the oil down to Tidewater. And there's going to be a lot of revenue to governments to support critical social programs. But the other strange, this is a bizarre kind of a trip, I guess a neutrality trip, which followed the trip by his deputy leader, who was then Megan Leslie, who was then just the minister of, or critic for the environment, who criticized the project at that time, and just last week said she disagreed with the 2,000-page scientific, objective, independent study done by the U.S. State Department. So presumably she is speaking with authority. She represents government policy. Why is he afraid to reiterate down in the United States what they believe? Maybe it's because he knows he's on very shaky ground.
So what's your fundamental criticism of Tom Mulcair's trip? I mean, should he have been more supportive of the pipeline in your mind? I mean, clearly he doesn't support the building of this pipeline. Will that affect the potential of the Obama administration to greenlight this project?
Well, look, of course we would like to see him supportive of this pipeline. Maybe the light would go on and he would repudiate his deputy leader and explain the inconsistency in his policies and so on. That would at least be an acknowledgement that he understands what's really at stake here in terms of jobs and economic growth. But I'm certainly not optimistic about that happening. I find it a bit odd, though, that he doesn't have the courage of his convictions. I mean, that's an abdication of leadership. As to whether, to answer your second question, as to whether, in fact, this is going to have any impact, I can't really say. I don't know if he has any credibility in the United States, but it's certainly not helpful. It's not helpful for someone from Canada in his position to come down and denigrate our environmental record, which is a really strong one. I mean, in many respects, we're doing the same thing as the United States. In some respects, we're doing more.
All right. Obviously, he takes a different view. He says your government has gutted environmental legislation. He says, for example, that the State Department review is just one part of a process. There'll be a public consultation, so the process isn't finished. He points to what your government did in the last budget bill in terms of the Navigable Waters Protection Act or the Fisheries Act. And his view, frankly, is that the Canadian government has done enough job, and he says we should leave this to the Americans. Let me just play you a clip of what else he said about this in Washington.
An NDP government would have made it a priority to take care of Canada's energy security, to create jobs in Canada, and to get a better price. That's a win-win-win. That would have been our way of doing it. This is a project that's on the table. I'm going to let the Americans come to their own decision on that. We know what we would do differently.
His proposal is, that they want to ship the oil east, not south, because you don't get a good enough price. And he basically says, it's not a sustainable way to build the economy. What's your response to that?
Well, first of all, this isn't a command and control economy. Maybe he would like it to be. The private sector has to make the determination about whether they're going to create these sorts of projects. They have to be economically viable. And the movement of oil to the east wasn't a priority because it wasn't actually. I mean, it's counterintuitive, but it was more expensive to do that than for Easterners to import oil from the Middle East. Well, that may no longer be the case. And so an economic case is being made, and we're very much in favor of oil moving east. I've said that repeatedly. I said it before he did, in fact. But we've also said that we've got a lot of resources, and we have to get the resources to Tidewater. We absolutely must diversify our markets. And we have an opportunity to do that, but we have to build the infrastructure.
So what about his view on, I'm quoting him, energy security. He says that we'll be able to ship oil down to the U.S., I'm quoting him, for 10 years, but if we kept it in Canada shipping it east, we could keep it for 100 years, securing Canada's energy future. Your view? Well, you're laughing at that.
Well, yeah, because we're going to have well over 100 years, of resources, regardless of where we ship them. We can ship it to the United States, which makes a lot of sense, and it would be right now, and it would create jobs right now. But as I've said repeatedly, we have to build infrastructure to move the resources east, west, and south. And we can do all of them. They are not mutually exclusive. And they all will create jobs, and they all will create revenue to governments.
You and I both know that there's now a link. I've talked to the Premier of Alberta, Alison Redford, about this, that she believes, and many believe, that the Obama administration's view on the Keystone XL pipeline will be linked to changes the federal government, your government, has to make vis-a-vis environmental protection and carbon curtailment. Even Preston Manning, at the Manning Center. Let me just show you what he said about the Conservative government's view on the environment. And he wrote this: one disturbing conclusion is that Conservatives are generally considered, and this by our friends, to be weak or disinterested on the environment. The issue is of greatest concern to many of our children and grandchildren in the policy area, where perceived weakness in this area have become the #1 obstacle to getting Canada's petroleum resources to market.
Well, you've introduced a few things, and in the course, and I haven't had a chance. No, but I haven't had a chance to answer them all. First of all, you referred to his comments or I guess it was Peter Julian's comments, that the State Department statement is just one part of the process.
Process, yes.
Well, it is the scientific part of the process. It came to a scientific and objective conclusion. So I do not denigrate that. I think that's really crucial. The public debate can build on that, and of course that's part of democracy. But science comes first.
And I'll ask Peter Julian about that exact report later.
Right. Now you mentioned. You mentioned Alison Redford, and I can't even remember in what context.
That was the link between greenlighting it and your government's record on the environment.
Listen, I was down in Chicago. I spoke to Rahm Emanuel, amongst other people. I was down in Houston. I gave talks. I spoke to a wide range of American observers and analysts, and that didn't come up. Actually, there was some talk about the U.S. linking it with some of their other policies. I didn't hear anybody say.
You don't think anyone's linking it? Like Ambassador Dewar, he even said on this program that they're operating under the assumption that there's a link.
Well, I did not hear that.
Okay.
But what we have been saying to the Americans, we're aligned with you in respect to our approach to protecting the environment in many respects, and some respects we're ahead. So I think look, the oil sands are 1/40 of the emissions of coal-fired electricity in the United States. So they have a much bigger issue to confront, and I don't know why all this fuss about the oil sands when coal is 40 times as emitting. I mean, if you have 20,000 people demonstrating against the oil sands, there should be 800,000 demonstrating against coal. Instead, there's none. And by the way,
I mean, some would argue, David Suzuki would argue because the oil sands is the largest single emitter of that project. Well, coal is dispersed, but your facts are right on the coal.
It's dispersed, but it's 40 times. But the other issue is that California crude emits more than the oil sands. So where are these celebrities who chained themselves to the fence at the White House? Why aren't they on Rodeo Drive demonstrating there as well?
Okay, fair point. But some of the critics may say the baseline isn't coal. The baseline is a clean environment. So you can always find other sources that are emitting bigger carbon footprints. But
we are
their
that.
Goal is the baseline should be about cleanliness, not what's the dirtiest.
That is our baseline as well. And that's why we have reduced greenhouse gas emissions from the oil sands by 26%, and we've spent $10 billion on alternative energy. So we very much care about the environment. We're doing things in a concrete way.
I got 30 seconds, and since we've packaged questions, what do you make of this?
You package questions.
That's right. So I'll keep stripping them out here. What do you make of that Preston Manning view, that conservatives basically don't have a good reputation on the environment? He wants this green conservative. He's talked about this for a long time, that it is a perceived weakness, he says, in this area, and conservatives are considered weak and disinterested in the environment. What do you say to Preston Manning on that?
Well, look, I read Preston Manning's speech. I didn't read all the things that he said, and what he said explicitly in his talk, he said, there is a middle ground, and I'm using his words, between radical environmentalists, and I want to get into that again.
That word has
his word,
okay.
But if he says it, it's okay, apparently.
I can't believe you restated the word radical.
I know, but I'm quoting him.
Okay.
And those who believe there is no climate change issue. Well, we're on neither side. We're in the middle. We believe there's a climate change issue. We believe the environment is very important, and that's why we're addressing that. At the same time, we believe there are enormous benefits from the development of our resources in a responsible way.
This is a very important debate going on right now, and it's a very controversial debate over the Keystone XL pipeline. Obviously, the NDP leader Tom Mulcair in Washington. You were in Washington, you were in Chicago last week about this, and this debate continues. Natural Resources Minister Joe Oliver, always good to have you on the program. Thanks.
Happy to be on.